Yates around that.
Okay. Anything else, Jeremy?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, we've got sound now. So
That's exciting. Oh, I can hear myself.
other comments or questions from the commission?
Quite a few.
All right, Wes, go ahead.
If the property is sold, is the IADU transferred with the property, or how is that, is it going to terminate or what? That's my first question. What's going to happen to the IADU if the property is sold? As far as the 75%, that excludes residential multifamily and residential patio homes. There's nothing in the ordinance that says that those are excluded.
In the ordinance, it references the matrix, the land use matrix, and those two do not have it as a permitted use.
I got hen scratchers all over this. Will the IADUs require a separate entry?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make
And
sure.
that's-
So there's gonna have to have a,
There's nothing in the new legislation that says whether the separate entrance has to be exterior or interior.
do we need to define that?
That's the city's call.
I think that's our prerogative. We can.
So
we
if
can
an
define that.
individual encloses their garage, calls it an IADU, it needs to have a separate entry. Because each IADU is required to have a mailing address, separate mailing address. So we need to have distinguish, which door is which. Each IADU shall have separate eating, bathing, living, and sleeping areas. Is that going to be 4 separate rooms, one for each of those, or is it going to be an apartment,
A studio type.
studio type apartment?
I don't think.
Do we need?
I don't think
Do
the
we need
type
a?
is
Do
restricted.
we need a standard that says this is what it needs to consist of? And Mr. Bill's comment about square footage, we have nothing to indicate how much square footage these can be. Is it going to be size of a doghouse, or is it going to be a full basement that's going to be an IADU?
Yes.
Now, what type of license is going to be required? Is it going to be a rental license or a commercial license?
It is. Let me just find that in the code real quick.
If it's a business license, it's going to be taxed. If it's a rental license, it comes under a different type of fee schedule, I think, for the city.
It
Says a
It
business
says
license.
business license required. Prior to occupancy of an IADU, the owner of record of any parcel shall first apply for and obtain a business license from the South Weaver City, from South Weaver.
There's different types of business license in the city. There's a rental business license and a commercial business license. Which one?
It's not defined here, but we, I
Should
would
we
leave that to
define
your
it?
recommendation on what you would,
Should we define it?
that's your prerogative, yes.
Also, who's going to do the inspections on these? How often are they going to be inspected? And another comment is if a new home is being built, can this be included in that new home design, or is this looking at an add-on to an existing home? We need to define that also.
We can define that if you would like. I think the ordinance is written that it can be created at time of construction as well. They would just have to apply for the permitting or the business license to utilize that space.
And the parking is going to be an issue, whatever we do, especially if it's a enclosed garage and a home has 3 vehicles, and how many vehicles are going to be allowed? A lot of them, is it going to be 2 vehicles or what? We need to define that also, I think.
So per the information I received, I'm looking to our legal counsel. We are able to require one additional parking stall. Is that absolute, or is it one or more?
The new legislation limits cities and townships from imposing a parking requirement in excess of one extra parking space. So require only one extra.
So yeah, here in the ordinance in 1019-7, item D, it says in the event a garage or carport is converted to an IADU, off-street parking shall be replaced on the space per space basis.
So if it's a two-car garage that's being converted, they have to provide 2 additional parking spaces.
Exactly.
I did have a thought on, while you're looking for your next one, I did have a thought on the business license. Perhaps leaving it open on the code that requires a business license, and then internally, administratively, we can determine what type of license that would be. That way, if we do change our licensing structure, that allows some flexibility in the code that we don't have to go and maintain code.
It's a good idea.
That's all I got.
Okay. Commissioner Walton or Commissioner Losi?
You go.
I'm having a tough time following the ball here. And here's what I'd recommend. Like, I think we all have similar comments based upon on-street parking or permitting and everything of the like. If we can structure our conversation mainly on topics instead of going between commissioners on what our issues might be, I think we might be coming to a better solution. But look to you
Okay.
for.
I'm good with that.
So Wes, I think the first one that you brought up was on-street or parking in general.
Parking, yeah.
So maybe if we can start there, if that's okay.
Okay.
I think I'm trying to gather my thoughts here amongst all my notes, but as far as parking is concerned, based upon the comments that we've received and what's written in the ordinance right now, I'm having a tough time figuring out what the requirement would be for a residential off-site or off-street parking stall. I know we're going to require something that's going to be around, I think the code says 180 square feet, but for a residential application, it doesn't talk about paved, non-paved. I don't know if that's a conversation that we want to, or a recommendation that we put into the ordinance. I'm additionally a little confused on the ordinance itself, where it talks about lot lines shall not intersect. I think scratching it at this portion of this ordinance, the IADU ordinance, certainly reveals that we have some inefficiencies in our off-street parking or parking ordinance that I'm not sure if we're entirely ready to start looking at tonight. But that's at least the portion of the conversation that I'm tracking now is what we have in front of us to decide tonight in regards to parking requirements for IADUs.
I just have to say, I agree with everything. I think right now we have to specify for these internal, and again, these are internal accessory dwelling units. We don't want people just parking on the grass. We don't want people just parking on, the side of a home that's maybe not, it's gravel, it's something like that. I think that's going to have to be very clearly defined here.
But don't we already have a code that specifies that?
It doesn't look like it's specified for
Well,
the internal.
not in this, but just in the code. There should already be something in there.
So
It says,
Mhm.
cement pavement, crushed gravel, or, cement.
Yeah.
Park on grass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Literally covers.
Okay. Because I know with some of these, and again, looking at the variety of housing that we have available, there are places where they have crushed gravel, but over the course of the years, it's now weeds, it's grass, it's native grasses, I guess if we can call it that. So how do we go about specifying that in terms of, okay, that this is now going to be a primary parking space? And I absolutely agree. We need to make sure that there is no on-street parking, that's not even considered as an option. It has to be off-street. You know, we've already got it in our city code to where you cannot park for 6 months out of the year during, what is it, November to March, you know, so do we allow it for the other 6 months where it's there? No, I think it needs to be very clear because we have other things going on. We have construction, we have street sweepers, we have, you know, cleaning crews, we have garbage, we have deliveries. You know, we don't want to be having our street access blocked. So that's specific to parking. I think we need to define it.
One thing to consider when you're talking about on-street parking is the ability for us to differentiate those that are allowed to do on-street parking because they live in a single-family dwelling versus an IADU dwelling. I think that you would find yourself in a very difficult position at that point.
Yes.
I agree.
So you could recommend no on-street parking, but that is a different section of code to talk about. But that if we do restrict that on IADUs, I don't know how enforceable it would be, unless it's the winter months.
So I'm looking at Title 10, Chapter 8 of our ordinance, trying to find a requirement for residential off-street parking. And I'm not finding any landscaping requirements or structure requirements. The only reference that I find is that parking areas for public use have to be paved. So again, I'm not sure if that's the conversation that we need to be having tonight versus maybe something we provide a recommendation back to either the code committee or city council that we're kind of scratching at the IADU ordinance and we're finding issues on that point.
So the thing with this, we're running out of time. We
Right.
literally have a month and a half.
So we'll have one more planning commission to approve this.
Yeah.
And
We do reference off-street parking regulations in Chapter 8 of Title 10. And right now, the ordinance does not reference that. So we can reference that code, that section of the code inside the ordinance to say these are the parking standards for off-street parking, which it talks about asphaltic or cement surfacing for that parking.
for non-residential uses.
Is that for non-residential?
I think that's what
uses?
the code says.
Okay, I'll confirm that.
Okay.
Anything more on parking?
Sorry, I'm just looking over.
You
all my
are
notes just
correct. It
to make
is
sure.
for public parking areas.
Okay.
Okay, what's the next topic? Want to cover?
You have your list? Yeah, I think mine was site alterations and historic preservation. You're okay going there?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Trevor, for the presentation that you provided. I think it highlighted something for me that I didn't originally catch when we had our conversations about this ordinance. And I'm wondering if you can give me further explanation as to whether or not sorry, what does it mean to have entrances on separate planes? Could that be, are we talking different levels, side elevations?
It can be separate elevations as the plane or the plane of the
Sides of a home.
sides of the home or the rear entry. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
it can be, I think plane is just whatever straight surface we are going on. So it can be elevation or
Okay.
not. I'll turn to legal counsel to see if my interpretation is correct on that.
I haven't read the ordinance, but when I hear the word plane, I think you stated it correctly, but you may have a definition somewhere for something ordinance that defines.
No, I don't think we do.
I
Don't.
And I'm just
I
trying to
don't
make
see.
this legible to planning commission and city councils and everybody at the like later, that this is what we meant by plane.
Mhm.
So I would recommend that we try to either define plane or maybe write a more descriptive statement of what that is intended to do. The other one that I wanted more clarification on is where the state law states that we cannot limit frontage requirements. I got too many things in front of me. I hope I'm stating that correctly. Let me get in front of your slides here.
Cannot limit the lot size and frontage of lots containing IDU.
Can you give me a better understanding of that? We can't limit the frontage of structures containing IADUs.
The notion there is you can't require that a home with an IADU has to have a minimum of 150 feet of frontage or 60 feet of frontage. That's just something you can't include in the ordinance.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, if somebody wants to come in and alter their home to include an IADU, do our current setbacks then become nullified based upon, okay.
The way I understand it, the way I've been from the other clients is that in the particular zone, you treat the home with an IADU the same as you treat the home next door that doesn't have it. The frontage requirements in that zone might be 70 feet of frontage per lot unless it's in a cul-de-sac. It doesn't have those kind of exceptions, but you can't make it different for a home with an IADU that you can or from any other home zone.
Okay. That clears that up. Thank you. And then the only other comment I had there was I like the idea of trying to preserve some kind of historic character of some of the structures in the city, and where we're seemingly not providing any limitations on the alterations of the building itself on IADUs. It seems like we might set ourselves up for something that we may not like in the future, but I don't necessarily know how we define a historic structure within the city, because I don't think we do now.
So I'm a historian and I hate historic overlays. I think if we had a clearly defined historic district, that'd be completely different. But a house here, a house here, a house here, I think you'll have a lot of angry homeowners if you tell them that they can't do anything to their house. And I would love to preserve those houses, don't get me wrong, but they are private dwellings. And if somebody wants to tear down that house, despite all the opposition of historic preservationists around the world, they have that right. And also with the historic home, if you are going to limit what people can do to that, historic homes are much more expensive to maintain and to modify than a typical home. So again, the historian in me would cry if I saw a historic home being torn down, but I've also heard all the comments and the feedback from people who do live in those things where, a historic overlay was issued, and some of the homes are historic, but some aren't. But because they're in that overlay, they have to follow those guidelines. So I would be against that at this point in time. So.
I think one thing to remember with the limitations on what areas we want to limit these IADUs, we will have to make sure that it's defensible. So a individual homeowner can say my house was targeted because it was older than 1960 and they didn't want it in that house. And so we would then have to be able to defend that position in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not saying that it's impossible and not something to consider as a recommendation to City Council. We just have to make sure that it is defensible going forward.
Right. Yeah. No. Sorry, Joel.
So I actually had something I wanted to add in on the separate entrances, exterior or interior. And is there an allowed second entrance between the units that's like a shared entrance? Is that something we want to discuss? Because think about it, most of us and most of the units, I think that these would kind of fall into, You're going to have your primary entrance into the home. You're going to possibly have a basement entrance or a side entrance coming in. What about a shared entrance in the house? Are we going to require that that entrance be enclosed? A locked door? Because I've seen it happen before where cities have actually required the shared entrance to be walled off. But then how does that put us in a situation in the city in terms of 2 points of egress in and out? I mean, you've got windows, obviously, with some of these older homes too. Are the windows big enough? You know, is this something that we need to address from a safety standpoint? Because heaven forbid we have an internal, you know, accessory dwelling unit that has a door that you can climb out of, but doesn't have windows that you can climb out of. That's a safety issue. How do we address that? And how is that being addressed here?
There's no, we didn't address that in the code. So right now that wouldn't be disallowed explicitly to have a shared common door within the home. You'd think these are internal accessory dwelling units typically used with the shared understanding that you're sharing the home in some way, shape, or form, and it's not a duplex. And so while you could make that recommendation, I don't know if it's advisable.
Excuse me, doesn't the 10-19-7 FB address that, Commissioner Losey? Is that, I mean, it doesn't specifically address shared entrance, but it says that each unit's entrance shall be distinct from the other, and even calls out that it's on a separate plane.
Yes, no, I'm aware of that. What I'm asking about is if there is another entrance that's like shared interior to, I guess, the main dwelling that the accessory dwelling unit also has access to, is that something that needs to be addressed?
I gotcha.
Yep. So what it says there, they've got on the code is under 10-19-7 FB, each unit's entrance shall be distinct from the other and shall be on a separate plane of the primary dwelling unit. So that tells me they have to have a separate entry to the IADU.
And that, I don't know, maybe I'm not clearly explaining myself. Like, I understand each unit's going to have their own separate entrance. I'm asking about what if there is an additional, like, I don't know.
So you might have said it and I could have missed it. What would be your concern if they had a shared entrance separate from the separate entrances?
That's, do we need to define that? Is that allowable?
Do you see a concern? You might have
is
stated that,
allowable.
like I said.
It is allowable to have a common door. I think the most likely example is maybe there was a large room downstairs that you converted into a studio apartment type, where you would have maybe an external entrance for that, but there would also maybe be another internal entrance into the home that you could access the laundry room, let's just say, or whatever. That is allowable.
Okay.
I think at that point, it may just be the homeowner's discretion to leave that locked.
So we keep that maybe a little undefined and allow that to be more on a one-on-one basis for determining.
Yeah, I think it's the prerogative of the commission to recommend anything within the bounds of state statute, but by leaving it a little bit more open, it allows for a flexibility of uses in the various home types that we do have within the community, where some may need to do it one way versus the other. So separate planes, again, if we wanted to define that has to be upstairs and downstairs, that may be a little more difficult because then it's specifically targeting homes that do not have a basement, or, so that's just something to consider in your recommendation.
Is there a need to specifically call out fire safety anywhere in here, or is that you feel like that's covered in the rest of the code? And I guess I'm thinking more specifically, if you have a basement apartment and they catch their kitchen on fire, and is there a need to have additional code that says there needs to be a fire safety layer somewhere between the two dwelling units?
I think you're
And
going to have that.
In fact, could I ask you to just go to a microphone?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You
Since
can
you're,
just scoot up on this side too. You don't have to.
yeah,
come all the way.
since you are sitting in as the legal counsel tonight, let's make you more official here.
Make it so you can hear me.
Yeah.
My name is Mark Bell. I apologize for arriving late. I gave myself an hour and 15 minutes to,
You're on.
I gave myself an hour and 15 minutes to come up and still I was 50 minutes. late. There you go. But I think the question on fire safety is going to be covered by the building inspection that's required prior to the issuance of the permit. And I think the same thing addresses Commissioner Losey's concern about whether you have a locked door in between. If there is a locked door in between, your building inspector is going to require that not only you have that separate entrance, but that you have egress windows.
And the fire inspection will also be required for the business license. They're gonna have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Next topic.
I took note on family considerations versus rentals, meaning do we want somebody to come in for a business license if they're gonna rent to family? I think the definition of family might come into play here in our city ordinance that may not require them to come in for a business license, but maybe just want to ensure that that is the case.
I think based on the code, we would require a business license in all cases.
In all cases.
So regardless of whether it's a family member that's being rented to or to a non-family member up to the specifications in the code or the ordinance.
Yes, it says prior to occupancy of an IADU, the owner of record of any parcel shall first apply for and obtain a business license.
So if they're not charging rent, does that mean they can allow family members?
Yeah.
All right. Right.
But as if you're charging rent, and didn't you say up to 250 is the limit? Did I
Somebody
hear
said
you
it.
say that?
I didn't say that. So
Thank you.
Hmm.
City code says
City code.
250 is the limit. So if they're charging 249, they could still be making, okay. Okay. Like, I know I heard that because I wrote it down.
Okay. I didn't have anything else on that one. The other one that I had was licensing, just general conversation on that. Wes, I was hearing what you're saying about if there's different kinds of licensing, we ought to prepare ourselves for what we're going to be asking these folks to do. And I was doing a frantic search in our licensing section of our city ordinance. And I couldn't find that there was different types of licensing unless you.
On the city website, it talks about commercial licensing, and it says business and rental. There's a license required for businesses and rental. So is this a business or is this a rental? How are we
Kim,
going to
go ahead.
describe that?
We don't actually currently require business licenses for rentals. They did years ago. We stopped doing that in 2016.
Okay, still on the
So
website.
it would be a regular business license.
Okay.
But they would be required, if they're collecting money, just like anybody else, they have to report their income.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, like the ordinance is addressing that concern, like there is no second guessing what license they're going to be coming in for. It is a business license.
Business license.
Got it. Sorry, I have way too many things that I'm referencing. I apologize. I think I just want to address some of the public comments that we received too, and within the businessing licensing requirement of the ordinance, I just want to address the Sand Zone's concern that they brought up about having a review process associated with a business license renewal if there are complaints or issues with neighbors within a certain distance, and I just want to make sure we're addressing that. Right, and making the assumption that within the proposed ordinance, we are saying that if it's the same process as a short-term rental, if there are complaints, issues, then they might have a revocation of their business license to operate that IADU.
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's in section 10-19-8 under violation. So, and that's specifically in there as well as a few other things.
Okay. Just want to make sure that we're connecting those dots.
Well, and it kind of touches on what Wes was saying in terms of the inspections. You know, who does it? Is it Chris Tremaine with code enforcement, or is it?
Couple different ones. So you're gonna find that Chris Command may be involved in part of it. There'll be fire inspections as well.
Okay,
And then during the building process, the building inspector will do the building inspections. So it'll be inspected. And yearly, you're gonna be required to have at least a fire inspection and a code enforcement inspection each year. to run it.
Okay, if they rent it out for 6 months at a time, 6 months and 1 day, and somebody else moves in, are they gonna have to have a separate inspection at that time?
No, because it's to the property owner, the
Okay.
homeowner, so it'll be just here.
and that I think addresses Wes, your question about, well, what happens if the house is sold?
Yeah.
You know, if the house is sold and they have, you know, the business license set up through the accessory dwelling unit, it doesn't automatically transfer to that new owner. That new owner, depending upon whether they want to use it as an accessory dwelling unit or then take that space back and use it as their primary residence, they would have to go through the process. Okay.
That is correct.
Anything else?
Oh, sorry. I'm tracking as many things as I can here. Just want to make sure we're not leaving anything undone.
I'm just checking off boxes over here as we're having
Good.
conversation, Taylor. You
Yeah,
need to be
I'm-
checking off boxes.
Well, did you want to,
Yes,
I'll
I
let you
have
go with
actually
your
have
boxes.
one, and
Yeah.
it just goes with what Wes had talked about in terms of the accessory dwelling units. They'll have the separate eating, bathing, living, and sleeping area. I think we need to define kind of what that is, because again, are we going to allow just a big four-wall studio apartment type setup where they bring in temporary room dividers and we say that's okay, or do we want to actually have it be defined? A
I-
bedroom has this space, a bathroom has a door, you know, kitchen areas, things like that. That was just one thing.
I think perhaps the clarification on size requirements might help address that, what the ability we have there.
And I do really like what, you know, Mr. Dills said in terms of, you know, we don't have to be so limiting, but I mean, 400 to 1,000 square feet. Does that sound good? Is that something that the council likes? I think right now in terms of our one-bedroom apartments that we have in the city, the smallest square footage there is, I believe, 700 square feet, you know, and that's for a one-bedroom apartment. I know with some of the other plans that have been presented, we're going even smaller in terms of what's going to be allowed. At some point, does the city get to say, we're not going to entertain something smaller than, I mean, 400 square feet is pretty small. Is that going to be enough space for the intent and what we're going to allow? Because I know we're kind of covered in terms of saying there can only be one internal accessory dwelling unit within the residence, but do we need to say what that size needs to be?
The size issue is defined in terms of the relationship between the IADU and the entire structure. You can't require a proportionality thing.
Okay.
The way I'm doing it right now with an ordinance I'm writing for another city is we've just said the minimum size is 400 square feet.
Okay. So you set a minimum, but then
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, so, and the notion there is, we're not gonna let you just rent out a bedroom.
I like that.
And, you require, separated kitchen and sanitary facilities, language like that.
So that's,
And,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure we're not limiting, because limiting the size of the IADU, which is something that we're saying within that presentation you gave us that we can't do under law, right?
no, you can't, it's, the language is you can't make it proportional.
Can't be 10% or
The-
25%.
Yeah, so, let me find the language here in the code.
I think the code is pretty, while you're looking that up, the code is pretty clear. It says each IADU shall have a separate eating, bathroom, living, and sleeping areas. I mean, if somebody really wanted to cram a toilet, a shower, a kitchenette, into one tiny room, I guess they could. And if somebody actually wanted to rent that place, I mean, they could, but I don't know if we need to.
I just want to make sure we're not running afoul to what the intent of the law
This
was.
is how the size limitation reads.
Okay,
A municipality may not establish any restrictions or requirements for the construction or use of one interior accessory dwelling unit within a primary dwelling, including a restriction or requirement governing the size of the interior accessory dwelling unit in relation to the primary building.
okay.
So for example, if you said that the IADU has to be at least 400 feet and the primary dwelling needs to be at least 750 feet, you've run afoul of the law. You're making one dependent upon the other. But if you just set a minimum size, you're okay.
And we're okay.
Thank you. That helps.
I don't know if there's a lot of value in dictating size, so long as, because I'm with, when looking at the code, it says only one per residence, and I think that restricts it enough. And if someone wants to live in a 500 square foot apartment or a 300 square foot apartment, then so be it, as long as it meets or checks the other boxes. I don't think we have to restrict the residence to a certain size. I don't know if there's a lot of value there.
Commissioner Walton?
I just had one other, and it's kind of closely related to what we were just talking about. And I'm not sure if we address any subletting concerns. Like if somebody was to rent an IADU, do we allow them to sublet? I don't know if there's a way that we can control that or not, but I certainly take the point that the Sand Zone's brought up, that everybody's looking for ways to maybe monetize, the use of their property. Once you let out your IADU, was to keep somebody from letting out all those rooms that they could have in that IADU. And is there a concern that we see with allowing that to happen?
Is that potentially covered under the 10-19-6, the standards of approval, just general item E, where it says that the internal accessory dwelling units may not be rented to more than one family unit? Because you would technically have a rental agreement in place with the one, and if they were to sublet, that would require a second. So does that cover us sufficiently?
I think the interpretation would probably be correct on that.
I would agree.
Sorry, what was the reference?
So look on page 33, 10-19-6.
Okay.
Standards of approval, general, item E, where it says you could only rent it to one family. And since we've kind of defined what family is, I think that would prevent somebody from subletting, because that
Okay.
would be to another family, if I'm reading that correctly.
Okay. No, and that seems to circle back around. So if they do sublet, that would be a violation of their business license.
I mean, if you want to have a clarification, that is your prerogative to recommend a clarification, but I think the interpretation can be made there.
I think we have lots of clarifications that we're going to be recommending on this.
That's just fine.
Okay.
Poke all the holes. That's what we get to do tonight.
That's your role
Yes.
as a planning commission. We'll talk about that when it comes my turn.
Why we needed the training
Yeah,
before.
seems like carts before the
Well,
horse here.
Okay.
I'm impressed with what I'm seeing. You guys are doing a great job.
All right, oh, go ahead, Commissioner.
So now are we going to, you're going to take our comments and incorporate those into this, and then we get another chance to review it?
I think right now we have general comments. There's never been a consensus direction. So I think we probably want to take this point to have some specific direction made by a majority of the commission on what to include and that.
So you're looking for a motion.
We may not
Maybe.
need a motion right now. What we
Okay.
could do is we could write what amendments we want to make to this document. And I'm gonna, hopefully he's gonna nudge me or turn my microphone off if I say anything wrong. Right now with the time constraints, to make the changes and then bring it back to planning commission to review would be difficult on the constraints. Because city council may be, with them being the end official say, correct, they may need a little more time to process on their end too. So we have to be a little sensitive of that. But what we could do is you can make the motion to recommend approval with the notated conditions, correct? To say that? No.
Or you would be recommending changes to the draft that's been prepared. The other thing you can do is always have a special meeting. I mean, this is kind of a big ticket item.
I hate special meetings,
We could just make it our
Yeah.
next meeting.
so.
We didn't have a meeting in July, so
That's right.
technically,
Because we had no reason to talk about
we
it.
have one more
So-
meeting.
That was our special meeting.
That was our
Yeah,
special
that's,
So I think this is my opinion, I think we've outlined the discussion. Now it's just a matter of one of us to put the list together, and I'm looking at Commissioner Walton because he's been writing frantically.
Well, unless I'm missing something, I think the only thing that we need greater clarification on or more discussion about is our parking ordinance and how we want to address parking within the proposed IAD ordinance. Correct me if I'm wrong.
If I can comment on that, the way I interpret the statute on IADUs is what you're allowed to do is require one additional parking space. And then any other parking restrictions that apply within the zone, you can't restrict or you can't discriminate against the home with the IADU versus any other home. So your general parking ordinance is the rule. But on top of that, you're allowed to require one more parking space on site at the home with the IADU.
If a garage is converted as a two-car garage, that's two parking spaces.
Yes,
So
they
then-
have
to
to
replace
replace those if it's a garage or carport replacement. But parking generally it's whatever it is in the particular zone. Plus, you can require one parking space per home with an IADU.
So a two-car garage, they have to replace the two parking spaces plus one more for the IADU.
Correct.
So I think with what I'm hearing, I think we have that addressed in this ordinance. And if we have questions about our other ordinance, I think we can address that
So I think
at a later time.
the question would be, do we make reference to Title 10, Chapter 8 within this ordinance? Which when you look back at it, is not particularly clear on what our requirement is, would be for an IADU in a residential zone. Or do we want to make a recommendation within the IADU ordinance on what our parking requirement would be for that off-street on-site parking?
Your only parking requirement in this ordinance is one additional parking space attributable to the IADU.
So we can't
You
do
can't go
anything
beyond
else.
And I have a question though, and this was actually something that was brought up in the public comment by Gary and Tina Stanzone about making sure that it wasn't in tandem with the parking that is to the primary dwelling. How do we ensure that? Because if you think about it, if you're saying, hey, your parking space is parking in front of our 2-car garage, that would necessarily be a tandem situation. Is that allowed?
It's allowed unless you prohibit it in the zone.
Okay. And I don't know, does our parking say that you can't have that?
No.
It doesn't.
Again, the difficulty is enforcement.
Yes.
So if we
So-
disallow it in the zone, then that disallows it for even the
Everybody.
primary
So,
home
so
dwellers.
the
Yeah.
practical distinction is, the family has a teenager at home. The teenager parks his car in back of where mom parks
Yep.
because she doesn't leave until after the teenager goes to school. You can't treat it differently.
Okay.
So I think we've got it, and we've done what we can,
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing. And, if we do need to address other parking concerns, and I think we tag that to the code committee and say, look at that, but
Agreed.
What did Gerald say?
Agreed.
Oh,
agreed.
okay. Yeah.
Anything else? I'm still really shooting to be done by 8.
So
We
are
haven't
there,
gone
are
past
there
8.
any other specific changes you want to put with the recommendation?
I'm not tracking any specific changes to the ordinance.
Minimum size. of the
Yeah, the minimum
IADUs.
square footage.
We need
I
to
like that
define
one.
Minimum square, isn't that defined elsewhere in our
No,
code?
and any recommendation.
So we define the size of rental?
City council includes those definitions.
Okay, thank you.
I thought sorry, I just wanted,
Okay.
I trust you.
While you're gathering your thoughts a little bit, there is something to add. I was just informed by Mr. Bell. Accessory dwelling unit exterior and accessory dwelling unit interior were not included definitions in our land use update that we did a little bit ago on the definitions. So those will need to be added with the recommendation to go forward to the city council to add those definitions into our code.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I did have a question because it does reference it in the 10-19-3 permitted uses limitations, item F, where it says that the external accessory dwelling units are prohibited. And that is obviously because this is supposed to be with the internal, and we don't have external defined based on what you just said.
You will once the
Okay,
package is adopted.
okay,
That's the reason for one of your recommendations to the city council ought to be that those definitions be included
need to be included in our
Yeah,
land use
in,
matrix.
in the ordinance adopted.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion?
I'm looking, I don't know. I'm trying to find, I trust. Just want to verify that we have a definition, or don't have a definition of a rental
I don't
size.
recall anything with rentals
Right.
specifying like what the minimum square footage needs to be.
So
I
think
would
it'd be-
like to define it. I
Right.
really would,
I think we put-
especially if this is going to be going back to code with our recommendations, just to clear up some holes.
Yep.
Because if somebody decides, hey, I want a 250, square foot accessory dwelling unit, there's no way you're going to be able to fit all of the eating, bathing, living, and sleeping areas within that space. So I think there needs to be a minimum.
You also got a sanitation issue.
I disagree. I think if somebody wants to do that and if somebody wants to rent it,
Mhm.
let them do it. If it passes the inspection, let them do it.
That's the key, is if it passes the inspection.
Yeah.
If you got a sanitary issue, then it doesn't pass inspection.
Exactly.
Is there something within the fire inspection and the city building inspection that they're going to look at and require? And do we know what that is? Is there a minimum specification in those inspections?
No, but they have to pass fire code and they have to pass health code.
Okay.
It all, it just goes back to is it safe egress, is it?
Mhm.
check
2
all
points
the
of
boxes.
egress.
That's it, but it doesn't get into square foot.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm not tackling the list.
It's as
So-
bad.
No, it's just, I think there's a lot.
So my recommendation, and I'll leave this up to whoever wants to make the motion, is that we forward this to the city council with the recommendation of the items we've talked about. Because the code committee's put a lot of thought into this. It's very time sensitive, and I think if we keep dragging our feet, we're going to miss the boat and we'll be stuck. So, but that's my thoughts. I'm only one of 5. So.
And I have a question. Could you, from the discussion, pull the points, obviously, that we have been going back and forth over, to have a concise enough list to give to city council?
I would say it'd be difficult at this point, so I would recommend listing what those points are.
Okay.
Perhaps you can list them now and then somebody make a recommendation based on the list given. Does that make sense? Or
Right.
when giving the motion, add them into that list on the motion.
I think in giving the motion, we just identify the issues that we
Mhm.
identified and want either
Unaddressed.
clarity on or being addressed.
All right, who wants to try that?
I already said no.
All right, I'll give it a shot.
We can. It'll be easier.
I'd like to make a motion on, let's see, South Beaver Code Ordinance 10-19, Ordinance 21-12, internal accessory dwelling units, that the planning commission recommended the city council that it be approved. Also, with the recommendation that we define an interior accessory dwelling unit and an exterior accessory dwelling unit in our code definitions, as well as looking at our parking ordinance associated with interior accessory dwelling units.
Look at parking ordinance, is that what you're saying?
Yep. So specific, it would be Title 10, Chapter 8, or city code.
You just want them to look at it?
Well, you're right. And I don't know if that's something that will just be maybe going back to code committee. But I certainly feel like there's a disconnect on, are we going to allow somebody to say an off-street parking site is the front lawn? Because right now I think that could be allowed in our ordinance. To review the ordinance. All right, we'll go with that. We'll have the code committee review Title 10, Chapter 8 for our parking ordinance to ensure conformity with IADU
Mhm.
ordinance. How'd I do?
Code committee to review parking ordinance Title 10, Chapter 8, to ensure conformity to IUCD.
Ordinance.
Okay, do I have a second?
I feel like we're missing something.
Fire away. You just have to amend it.
I know. And now we're going down that slippery slope. Because again, it goes back to the license requirements and the review process. So can I make just an amendment that we also include a defined approval, the business license, and then also a annual check-in?
Automatically
It's-
It's already
It's
there.
already there.
Okay, perfect. Then I withdraw my amendment.
You can go ahead and
Is
second.
that right?
Yeah.
I'll just second the motion. There.
Okay, so we have a second. We will do a roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Losi,
Aye.
Commissioner Walton,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. Okay. So we've got 17 minutes. If we want to get out here by 8, we've held the record so far, so we will now go back to item number 4, Commissioner Training provided by Mark Bell from Hayes, Gottfried, and Bell. Mr. Bell.
Let me get my things set up. And do, well, we'll see. We'll see. I have faith.
Sorry.
I have faith.
I may make that.
Do not let me leave tonight without giving you this Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet. Okay.
Be great.
Max up there, right? He has a presentation.
Yeah, please. How do I connect?
I think it's a hardware connection up there. Yeah. So. We'll wait for you.
If I disconnect my laptop.
Can you forward your PowerPoint?
I have a flash drive.
Exactly what we talked about.
Yeah. And keep those for staff or whomever.
Do we have city mailboxes? Yeah, like have to put that in for Jeremy, like a cubby, so that he could come by and pick up some. We need city mailboxes.
There's a amending a motion. It's right there. Fill in the blank. He was late. I've been at this for 6 years.
Can I get a copy of that paper sent to me?
Can you buy your chair?
Yeah,
Jeremy?
we'll make sure we do that for you, Jeremy.
Okay.
Kim, we need to make sure we get a copy to Commissioner Davis.
Of,
Electronic.
yeah, I
Okay.
actually, I'm over there, I'll scan it in.
Do we
Okay.
have mailboxes here, like for documents or anything like that? Okay,
I'll scan it over to him.
okay. Sorry, I kind of went back to the 80s. Mailbox.
Okay, now what we're doing here tonight are planning commission basics, and I will try to keep it as basic as humanly possible. First of all, I commend you for the way it's been run tonight. One of the essential things is for an orderly meeting is deference to the chair and allowing the chair to do his or her job in controlling the meeting and keeping some decorum and some politeness among meetings. Where I have seen contention and things, it's where the chair loses control and members of the commission or city council don't respect the authority of the chair. So that's really critical. But let's go to the first page.
We go to the next one.
Yeah, yeah, page 2. I'm sorry. Everything we do is covered by the Utah Land Use Development and Management Act. What is that? I'm not going to go into it. If you guys have had your basic training, you know that we have LUDMA out there. Yeah, and you know that section 302 requires that every city and municipality have a planning commission. And it defines, let's go to the next slide, please. It defines the powers, duties, and training and so forth for planning commissions. Planning commissions have basically 2 roles. One is to make recommendations to the city council. And that's what I would define, or the law defines, as a legislative role. You're in the political process as you make recommendations, just like you did tonight. And in that process, you have a lot of discretion on what you can do. Your opinions matter as you make these recommendations for different ordinances and general plan revisions and things like that to the city council. Next slide, please. You're required to have a certain amount of training each year. Hopefully the Utah League of Cities and Towns is in touch with you and letting you know where you are on that. If not, let our office know and we'll make sure that everybody's on the same page. But the league ought to be sending you regular notice about training opportunities that are there and what the minimum mandatory training requirements are.
So Trevor, we need to make sure we get that because I haven't seen anything
Yeah, I haven't
in
seen
2
that either.
years. So I don't
I
know.
will.
Anybody
get
else?
on
Be
see
careful what
anything?
you wish for. I get all kinds of stuff from
You get a lot of emails from the league.
Yeah, you do.
Well, just like American Planners Associations, ton of emails from there too. So it's my South
We'll
Weaver
get you
email.
hooked
That's
up.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. Just a matter of getting on the list.
Okay.
Now,
thank
in
you.
addition to LUDMA, at the bottom of this slide, you'll see a reference to the city code. 10.3.1 and the sections that follow are the sections of the city code that govern the planning commissions. The planning commission. Section 10.3.5 talks about administering the provisions of the law, making recommendations for recommend approvals and denials, things like that. Next slide, please. This is where I get into, at least in slide wise, into this notion of legislative acts and what your involvement is there. So as you are involved in making recommendations to the city council, you are recommending policy decisions. You're not making the decisions, but you're making recommendations based upon the input that you're hearing from your neighbors and friends, based upon the study you do and the training you get as to what the best policies are for the community. And like I said a few moments ago, in this arena, your personal opinion counts. Now, you've got to boil that down into a vote of at least 3 people to get the recommendation to the city council, but your opinion counts in this arena. Now, the other essential responsibility you have is more or less administrative responsibilities, and I don't know how where the final decision-making point is with South Weber, but for example, if you have authority to make conditional use approvals and those don't get passed on to the council, you're acting in a solely administrative function. Or if there are plat amendments that stop solely with you, or anything along those lines where you're functioning in a decision-making capacity, those are you're functioning as a land use authority, and you don't have discretion to do what you want. Your responsibility on those situations is to look at what the statute says or what the ordinance says and test the application against what the ordinance says.
What about the general plan?
The general plan, you make a recommendation for the general plan to the planning commission or to the city council. That's a legislative function.
Right.
But to the extent that applications for permits and so forth come before you for final decision, or at least a decision before they go up on appeal, then your job is to compare that application with what your ordinance says. And in that circumstance, you leave your opinion at the door. So that's kind of the 2 different roles that or different hats, if you will, that a planning commission wears in terms of its responsibilities. Next slide, please. Middle of this one, I have a bullet point for an advisory role. This is very much like the legislative role. But, you know, it's worth pointing out that your role is to shape policy, not make policy. You shouldn't view your position on the Planning Commission as having a constituency that you're answering to. You're responsible to the entire community and for the betterment of the community as a whole. Now, I know that's easier said than done.
Could
because
you repeat that one more time, please?
Okay. But what I'm saying is that as a member of the Planning Commission, you should avoid, if at all possible, a mindset where you feel like you need to answer to your constituency. Accepting the appointment as a planning commissioner, you're accepting an appointment to look out for the betterment of the community as a whole, as opposed to just answering to a group of people who want to see multi-unit housing in this side of the city rather than the other, things like that. You know, what is better for the community as a whole. So you're there to shape policy, not make policy. If a member of the Planning Commission wants to make policy, then next election cycle, throw your hat in the ring. It's the city council who makes the policy. Next slide, please. Now, that kind of jumps away from our roles and responsibilities. And here's just a few quick things that you need to keep in mind. And I've got 5 minutes.
See, I like him.
You are subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. And the third bullet point here is basically the long and short of it. You take your actions openly, and we do our deliberations openly. It's fine for you guys to have a one-on-one conversation offline about what you think on this, but you better dang well not have 3 of you on the line, because then you have a quorum, then you've got a meeting, you've violated the law, and it has significant consequences. Those consequences might be the city gets sued for violating the Open and Public Meetings Act. And you might get sued individually for violating the Open and Public Meetings Act. And if the judge finds that you have violated it, you're going to pay the fine. If the city believes as it goes into it that you violated it, the city's not going to provide an attorney for you. You're going to be paying for your own lawyer. And then it's a Class B misdemeanor, 30 days in jail, or no, 6 months in jail, $1,000 fine. What's the concern there?
So I was in charge of social media at Clearfield City. I think one consideration is you need to be careful on your appearance on social media, where that conversation doesn't end up being a discussion about a topic specifically between 3 or more of you on one forum. Just be considerate of what that may appear as.
The Open and Public Meetings Act doesn't directly address electronic communications. You're allowed to have electronic communications between each other in between meetings, but if that turns into a 3-way text message session, that violates it may not violate the letter of the law, but it certainly violates the spirit of it. And we wouldn't want South Weber to be the poster child in the Deseret News, Salt Lake Tribune, and the Standard Examiner for violating the Open and Public Meetings Act or trying to skirt it by doing it through text message. Same thing goes for text messages while you're sitting up there doing planning commission business. So you have the text message going, you say, "Now this guy Bell, he's really bald, isn't he? He's a little overweight." You're having a communication during a meeting in which all your communications need to be public. So just little things like that, keep in mind. Chants or social meetings are not a violation of the Open and Public Meetings Act. So, you go to the same wedding reception, you're free to talk with each other. You're even three of you are even free to talk with each other, but don't talk about city business. Next slide. You guys know that you have to have a quorum. You can't vote by proxy. You can't vote by electronic communication. If you're going to vote and you're not on site, you need to make sure you have an electronic meeting, A, on the agenda, and B, worked up to where the public can participate. Next slide, please. You are subject to the Utah Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act. And that requires that you disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest. I don't know if the city has an established conflict of interest form. You need to fill that out probably at least annually, or if there's any change in your business status or property ownership and things like that. One of the things that's really important on the Ethics Act is it's clear to all of us that we can't use our position to benefit ourselves. But here's the language on the third bullet point. You can't use your position to secure special benefits or a special benefit for the officer or employee or for others. What's the special benefit? I'll tell you an example I had a number of years ago. I'm on the bubble.
You're good.
But
You're good.
the mayor in a community, very small community, owned a hotel along Main Street. In front of this hotel in front of part of this hotel property, there wasn't curb, gutter, and sidewalk. But with the CDBG grant, they're working their way up Main Street towards his property. He goes to the contractor and says, "Can you give me the same price? Or can you give Mr. Smith next door the same price and get it to me?" You're using your position to get special privileges. You may be paying fair market value, but it's not what the guy down the street who wants the curb, gutter, and sidewalk in front of his yard is going to have to pay if he's got to take it out to bid. Next slide. When to abstain or recuse. You need to abstain if you have a conflict of interest. And generally what that would mean is that you not participate in the meeting and likely, leave the discussion. But on the other hand, you can't abstain just because you're not uncomfortable with having to make a decision. You can't abstain if you're afraid, or you shouldn't abstain if you're afraid of what your neighbor's going to say to you about your vote last night. When you accept the position of being on the planning commission, what's your job? Your job is to vote. There may be special circumstances where you may want to consider disclosing and voting, particularly if by recusing yourself and you're running up against a 2-2 vote. If disclosure covers the requirements of the Ethics Act, and then your vote would enable a vote to be effective, then talk with Mr. Blakesley, and you may, put something on the record that says, I have this conflict of interest. Here's what it is, but I'm going to participate in this. That's the last bullet point on this page. Consult with your city attorney. I've given you the cheat sheet on Robert's Rules of Order. The notion here is to have orderly meetings, have a full and free discussion, and do justice to the public, be courteous to the public, be courteous to the majority and to the minority. And that's why we have these rules about when we speak. When a member of the commission wants to make a comment, raise your hand, ask the permission of the chair, and then the chair will recognize you. It makes for an orderly, respectful process. And what you telegraph to the public is that you're working as a team, and you're not going to let what's happening turn into a rumble, basically. Next page, next slide talks about what is a motion. It's a formal proposal to consider something and take an action on it. The form of the motion is, I move that, da 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 da. If there's an immediate agreement, or if someone wants to agree with the motion, that person seconds the motion. At that point, the chair inquires whether there's any discussion on the matter. So at that point, there can be discussion on the matter. And once discussion is concluded, the chair can call for a vote, or a member of the commission can say, I would like to, I like the motion, but I would like to substitute some language, or I would like, I'd like some alternative language. We address that on the next slide, where it talks about amending a motion or doing a substitute motion. As you do that, Mr. Chairman, you need to, you state what the original motion is, and then state what the amendment is, or state what the substitution is. Ask for a second on the amendment or substitution, and then you kind of work from there. But that cheat sheet should help you a lot. And then if there are, questions that arise, rely on Mr. Blakesley. But there's also a motion to table discussion of something. Generally, you want to say why you're tabling it, not just because it's uncomfortable. You might want to say we're going to table this because it's become unruly in this room. Or the biggest likelihood is we want to table this because we need further study. Mr. Cahoon, get to work on the further study. What's that? Well, he's asking about continuing an item. I think that's essentially synonymous with tabling an item. Call it what you will. But the notion generally is that you need further information, and that's the reason you're holding off. Yes.
I have a question. If you're tabling versus continuing, is there a certain process, time frame? Like tabling takes it automatically to the next meeting, continuing takes it automatically to the next meeting?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule that it takes it automatically to the next meeting. I think that's the presumption. So if you think it's something that's going to take longer than that, you would say, I table this motion until such time as Mr. Cahoon or staff has enough information to bring us another report. Or I table this motion until the next meeting and expect staff to have a report for us in the next packet. Something along those lines. General rules and protocol. Chair is to remain impartial pending the vote. So try not to show emotion about what's happening. And the mask is really an effective tool with that. Your job is to, particularly when you have a public hearing like tonight, listen, focus on issues, and if at all possible, do everything you can to take personalities out of the process. Respect each other. Don't question each other's motives. Be polite. If there's a question about motives and things like that, do that offline. do that out of the public eye and do it one-on-one. If you do it two-on-one, you've got a quorum. So, and that's it. So 8:08.
I can live with that.
Okay. And if you have any questions at all on any of these things, give Jamie a call. If Jamie's not available, you're welcome to ask for me as well. But you've got a great city attorney. He's a bright, capable young man.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Number 7, Planning Commission comments. Anything, Commissioner Losi,
No.
Commissioner Walton?
Just 2 things. First of all, thank you, Mr. Bell, for your presentation. That's really helpful. There was a couple things from his presentation that I thought would be good things to recommend, and that the first one would be, or maybe a question. Do we have a standard form for disclosure of conflict of interest? Okay.
There's a form when you sign up for the council member and.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Disclosure conflicts of interest.
Okay. And then just the training, the annual training by Utah League of Cities and Towns.
It's good.
When was the last time you remember going to one? I'm thinking it might be 3 years.
There's a
for
ton
me.
of stuff available online.
Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of us placing a priority on getting us enrolled in something here soon.
Knowing about it.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I'll get
Anything
that
else?
put together.
Commissioner Johnson?
Nothing.
Commissioner Davis?
I'm good.
Okay, I do have one item, just as a reminder for the public and also the city council. If the public has something they want to bring before us, do so. I mean, you're welcome, more than welcome to join us here in chambers. There's also the public comment email that the city has. And as we saw today, I asked Mr. Cahoon if he would read the public comment in. So I think we'll start doing that. Don't email a city council member. And then Blair, if you want to take this to the council, I think it would be nice if that happens, if the city council could refer that person to come to the planning commission meeting rather than address that. We got an email about an hour before the meeting from a city councilman or a city council person that, I don't know, I wasn't very happy. So again, just a reminder for the public, if you have something for this body, address it to this body. If we were to get something for the city council, I would expect that we would all do the same thing and direct them to the city council. So that's all I have. Again, appreciate the training. Trevor, appreciate you. And also want to express our thanks to Sherry Fippen. She did a lot of the legwork on this ordinance we discussed tonight, and we wish her well. And with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.